Welcome to Ground Control, the third and final video on the review of the TX16S, RadioMaster TX16S with Hall effect gimbals, multi-protocol transmitter. I thought about this and I don't think 20 videos on this radio would do it justice. So, but you got to stop somewhere. So I will continue to create tips and tutorials on this radio as I get more expertise with it. I'd never used OpenTX until I got this transmitter. So let's go over some of the items it comes with. It comes with a 2 lithium-ion battery bay for the 18650 lithium-ion batteries, 3.7 volt. It comes with this battery tray. What I use in it is a 2-cell LiPo battery, and I have a zippy 1300 milliamp 2-cell LiPo in here. It's 25C. I love how much room is inside this battery bay. And this battery, a 1300 milliamp battery, look how much room is in there even after having this 1300 milliamp 2-cell battery in here with an XT 60 connector on the discharge cable. So you can plug your 2S LiPo balance cable right into the port on the bottom of it. You know, you can get a big enough battery in here, you're going to be able to fly for hours and hours and hours and hours. So I love that. That has a much larger battery bay than my other transmitter. It comes with this real nice storage case, and I think it would make a nice transport case too. It's made out of EPP foam. It comes with a little tiny miniature TX16S keychain. It came with the battery bay like I just showed you. It comes with a USB cable with a USB-C connector on it that can work as your charging cable or as your interface cable for your computer to do your firmware updates. Use the OpenTX companion software. So I think that the next video that I do on this transmitter is probably going to be, you've looked at the setup for a traditional plane. I think I'm going to take my King Kong Tiny Wing 450. I'm gonna mod it a little bit, and I think I'm gonna set it up on this radio. So I'll have a short tutorial on how to set up an Elevon mix for an Elevon park jet or for a wing, so that you'll have that information, as well as, you know, setup of a traditional airplane. And of course I'll make my model files available too once I get it all trimmed and get the dual rates and the expo set up the way I like it for that little wing. Then I will definitely give you guys the model file for that as well. So criteria for a transmitter: number one, you're going to be out flying for hours, so you want it to be comfortable in your hand. And I think the ergonomics on this radio are really good. I love these deep rubber grips on the back of it for holding the transmitter. The sticks, these Hall effect gimbal sticks, are so smooth. I really and have tons of resolution on the sticks. So you have very fine resolution on the sticks, and the sticks center very well. You know, if you look at the channel monitor, I mean, every time I look at the channel monitor, the sticks are, you know, right on the 0 mark, and they don't drift like, you know, mechanical sticks do. So I think that is an absolutely awesome feature. The other criteria, the reason that I wanted a multi-protocol transmitter to begin with, and like I said, I was kind of doing this review in reverse. The reason I wanted a multi-protocol transmitter was because I hate using those toy transmitters that you get with those ready-to-fly planes. And so with this transmitter, I'm not going to have to use those transmitters anymore. And I figured, you guys are probably like me, you know, the first thing that I wanted to do when I got this transmitter was I wanted to set it up, bind it to one of those planes, get it set up, and go fly it with this transmitter to see how different it was. Now, that's the other factor with the transmitter. How well can you control the aircraft with the transmitter? And I think that these microplanes are a much better test of the transmitter than a larger plane, because I mean, let's face it, the microplanes are not as stable in the air as a larger plane is. Microplanes are harder to fly, and especially fly smoothly and accurately while doing maneuvers. So I think the microplanes are the ultimate test for a transmitter, and seeing how well you can program the planes and how well you can control the planes with it. So I demonstrated not one, not two, but 3 microplanes with this transmitter: the Volantex Sport Cub 500, the Eachine Mini P51D, and the Eachine Mini F4U Corsair. And you saw how well and how smooth you could fly them with this multi-protocol transmitter. And my skill level as an RC pilot is, I consider myself an intermediate level pilot, flying RC aircraft. And if I have intermediate skills and I can fly those planes fairly well with this transmitter, which means you guys will be able to do that as well. I have 3 quick tips that I want to show you regarding this transmitter before I give you one last piece of information, and then that will conclude the review on this transmitter. All I can say is, I think, looking at the price, looking at the features, looking at the quality of this transmitter, the fact that it's a multi-protocol, so you can bind to tons of different aircraft, you'll no longer be limited to the receivers that you can buy and use. I think this transmitter is an exceptional value, and I am very, very happy to have it. I want to thank Banggood again for sending me this transmitter. This is, like I've said it several times, and I'll say it again, this is a game changer. So with that, I'll put up the first of 3 tips, and after the tips are finished running, I'll give you one more piece of information on this transmitter. So here we go. Okay, so here's a cool feature that I wanted to show you. It's something that you guys can use right away. I have been using this feature since I set up my first model file in the TX16S. So let's say that we want to put some trim into our rudder. Okay, so I've got 7% trim in my rudder. Okay, and let's say that's trimmed the plane out pretty well. So then we want to go into our model file, and we want to go to our output channels. And as you can see right now in channel 1, this is your sub trim. There's no sub trim on channel 1, which is the rudder. Currently it's all in standard trim, in the radio trim. So if I scroll down to the bottom of this page, you'll see a selection down here that says trims to sub trim. Okay, so I'm going to click that, and you'll hear the radio beep, and you'll feel a little vibration that it has transferred the trims to sub trim. So now if I go back to the top, now you can see channel 1 now has -7.4 in sub trim, and if I go back to the main screen again, you'll see that now my rudder trim is centered again. Although it shows up here on channel 1, it does show the amount of sub trim that's on that channel at -7%. So we have left trim in at 7%. So when I'm trimming out my planes, I get them as close as I possibly can using mechanical trim when I'm flying the plane, rather than using radio trim. Now you can't always get your mechanical trim absolutely perfect on your plane. You have to use a little bit of radio trim, you know, that last mile, so to speak. So once I get it mechanically trimmed as best as I can, and I have some small adjustments that I need to make on trim on the radio to get it flying just perfectly straight and perfectly level, I will input that trim into the radio, and then I will transfer it to sub trim. And the reason that I do that is when you're using normal trim in your radio, what you're actually doing is you're actually moving the servo, and you're using part of the total travel of your servo as part of your trim. So what that means is if your servo is centered, you have just as much movement to the right as you have to the left. If you're using part of your left travel of your servo to set as trim, then you have lost some of your travel to the left. You still have as much travel to the right, but you don't have as much travel to the left anymore. Transferring your normal trim to sub trim, what that does is it offsets the position of that servo so that you have as much travel to the left as you have to the right. It resets the center of that servo to that offset for your trim. Now, I think that only works if you're not using 100% dual rates, because if you're using 100% dual rates, that usually means you're using the maximum amount of travel of your servos. But let's say you're using 90% and you input 5% radio trim and you transfer that to sub trim. Since you still have, you have 5% in either direction that you're not using because you're using 90% rates, moving or offsetting the center of that servo by 5% to the left means you are still going to have full travel to the left and full travel to the right because you're not using the complete movement of that servo. That is where sub trim really comes in handy. I always transfer my regular radio trim to sub trim. If you look at my model files, if you import one of my model files, you will not see any radio trim, but you will see sub trim, and that's why I stated in one of the last videos that if you import my model files, make sure that you zero out the sub trim. So that's how I do it. This is a really cool feature that makes trimming out your plane and transferring those into sub trim just as easy as pushing the button that I just showed you. No longer do I have to calculate the amount of sub trim that I need to put in to get it precisely where I had it in regular radio trim. That's done for you. So that is a huge shortcut. It's a huge time saver. It's a feature of the radio that you're going to be able to use right away, and I have been using it, like I said, since I set up my first model file. So let's go on and see the next cool feature. Okay, so here's another cool feature. Let's go ahead and power up our radio, and I'm going to take switch SG. I'm going to take it out of its default position and move it all the way forward, and I'm going to power on the radio, and I should get a warning that that switch is not in the proper position. Switch warning. There we go, SG. It's all the way forward and the default position should be back. Okay, so let's say that this is the default position of all my switches. All the switches that can be pushed up are up. All the switches that can be pushed back are all the way back. That's the default setting for all my switches. If any of those switches are not in the proper position, it's going to give me a warning. That's the way I have the radio set up. I use the SG button for my flight modes button, but let's say that you want the SG mode button to be set up like you have on the stock transmitter for let's say the Eachine Mini P51D, where beginner mode is all the way forward and the center position is intermediate and the back position is manual mode. So you want to make sure that when you launch your plane that it's not going to be in manual mode. You would rather this switch function like the one on the stock transmitter. Unfortunately, if you have it forward like that, you're going to get a switch warning when the radio boots up. So in order to change that to where the default position is going to be the forward position, we go into the model file and we scroll down until we get to our switches. Okay, right there's our switches. We've got it highlighted. Now all we have to do is hold down the enter key here. Okay, now it shows the switch G pointing down, or basically pointing forward. So that's the new default position for that switch. So you'll hear a beep, and then you'll feel a little vibration in the radio when it records the new default position for all the switches. So now we can go ahead and back out of here. Let's go ahead and power it off. Now remember, when I powered it up last time and I had this switch forward, I got a warning message. Now that we've recorded that as the default position for switch SG, we should no longer get that warning. Welcome to OpenTX. And as you see, we didn't get a warning now. So that has recorded switch G's new default position as being forward. Okay, so that's not my default position. So I'm going to go back in here again and change that back. Okay, so now it shows the arrow pointing up at G. So now that's back to my my default position for that particular switch. So that's another cool feature. You want to make sure that you get warnings on some of these switches, especially like your flight mode switch. You don't want to take off in the improper flight mode. If you want to have a default flight mode set up, you definitely don't want it to bind to your plane if your throttle safety switch isn't engaged. So having a stick warning on the throttle and having warnings come up on the radio for whenever one of your switches is not in the default position is a good safety measure, and it's easy to set just by moving the switch and setting the new position. So that's another really cool shortcut that everybody can use right away. Okay, another cool feature of this radio, because I have heard of a couple of flyaways with these micros. Now, I fly out in the middle of the desert. I'm a mile into the desert from the main road, so I don't have a lot of 2.4 gigahertz frequencies going on out there where I fly. And I've flown my microplanes pretty far away and pretty high, and I've never lost radio contact with them. But if you go into the system menu, and you go to the bottom where it says Spectrum, and I assume INT means internal, and you click that, you have a spectrum analyzer. So as you can see, since my wireless network in the house is 2.4 gigahertz, you can see that there's a lot of traffic inside my house on the 2.4 gigahertz band. So wherever you're going flying with this radio, you can bring up the spectrum analyzer and see how much noise there is on the 2.4 gigahertz frequency when you're going out to fly. Maybe, you know, if you see a lot of traffic like that, maybe you want to find a different place to go fly. But I thought that was a pretty cool internal feature, especially, you know, if you've experienced a flyaway before, you might want to use the spectrum analyzer to see how much 2.4 gigahertz frequencies are out there. Okay, so that's another cool feature that you can use right away. So let's go ahead and exit out of this. Okay, back to the main menu. And then when you're in the main menu, if you page, you'll get also your switches. You'll see your channel output, but you'll also see the position of your switch. As you can see, my momentary switch, when I press it, the little arrow or marker is showing down when it's pulled forward and up when it's in its normal position. Okay, so I think those 3 tips are valuable tips to have. Anybody who's, you know, new to this radio or going to be getting this radio, those shortcuts for the sub trim, for setting up your default positions on your switches, the spectrum analyzer, those are all great features to know right away. So the last piece of information that I have for you on this transmitter is the size of the battery bay. You know, I like having the battery bay dimension information so I know what LiPo I may have on hand that's going to work in the transmitter, work in the aircraft, whatever. So the dimensions of this battery bay are 96 millimeters by 52 millimeters by 18 millimeters. Now remember, that's the total dimensions of the battery bay. You're going to have to leave room for your cables, for your discharge cable and your discharge connector to fit in there with the battery. So keep that in mind. Thank you guys for watching. Links to this transmitter and the planes will be in the show notes. Take a look at those. We've got direct links to it. They're for our affiliate accounts. We get a small commission at no cost to you. If you buy one of these products, please use our affiliate accounts. It really helps us out in the future buying products to review. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the air.